This is The Competitive Edge with Noah Lehmann-Haupt. Welcome to The Competitive Edge. My name is Scott Britton, and I'm here to help you answer a question that we all have. How can I get an edge in my business and life? Each week, we're going to uncover how some of the most successful and inspiring entrepreneurs, entertainers, and thought leaders get an edge so you too can reach your full potential. Thanks for tuning in today. Now let's get started. What's up? What's up? Welcome to another episode of The Competitive Edge. I hope you are on fire today and appreciate you tuning in. Today's guest might have the company that I'm most envious of amongst everyone we've had on the show. I'm honored to welcome Noah Lehmann-Haupt, the co-owner and CEO of Gotham Dream Cars. If you haven't heard of Gotham Dream Cars, his company does exactly what it sounds like. Allows people to get access to the coolest cars in the world, like Ferraris and Lamborghinis, Rolls Royces, and probably a bunch of other sweet types of cars that I don't even know the names of. Today, Noah is going to share how he went from a 25-year-old who had difficulty renting a Ferrari to drive cross-country to starting and scaling the largest exotic car rental company in the world. You'll learn everything from how he's able to get financing to scaling a bootstrapped profitable business, and even get some crazy stories that resemble one of my favorite pastimes, playing the video game Grand Theft Auto. We'll finish today's show with some thought-provoking ideas around who we should take feedback and advice from, so make sure you stick around to the end. All right, let's hear from Noah about how he built Gotham Dream Cars. Noah, how are you, man?
I'm good, Scott. How are you?
Dude, I am so good. And like we were joking, I can't believe that here we are. You're driving around using a Bluetooth jiggered setup in your car, and I'm down in Brazil, and we're getting to have a conversation right now. It's pretty cool.
It's amazing. I'm in San Francisco over Skype over Bluetooth, and you're sitting in Rio, and that's modern technology for you. I love it.
I love it, man. So no, I feel like your business is the type that when people hear it, they probably think it's the coolest thing in the world. Can you take a minute and just tell everybody a little bit about Gotham Dream Cars?
Sure. I think, some might argue it is a pretty cool business, but it's got its ups and its downs. So Gotham Dream Cars is a exotic car rental and experience company that I started about 10 years ago. Our bread and butter business is we rent out Ferraris and Lamborghinis and Bentleys and Porsches and Aston Martins and BMWs and Mercedes and Maseratis and Rolls Royce and everything you can imagine. We rent them by the day, or the weekend or the week. And we also do exotic car experiences. So we run things like our thing called the Dream Car Sprint, in which we set up a little autocross track, and you get to drive a Ferrari or Lamborghini for a few laps around our little mini autocross track. Or our Dream Car Tour, which is an experience we run where you get to drive 6 different exotic cars over a 120-mile public road course that we put together, and every 15 miles you switch around and get to drive a different car. So that's what we do. We are the exotic car provider.
I love it, man. How many cars do you guys have today?
We have about 35 cars in our fleet around the country, which does not sound like a ton, but they're all, average price of a car is $150,000. So it's a pretty big chunk of metal we got.
I was going to say 35 Ferraris and Lambos doesn't sound too shabby to me.
Yeah, I actually it's funny. I went over our sort of history of how many cars we've owned, and we've owned total in the last 10 years through cycle. We've owned, I think, close to 80 different Ferraris and Lamborghinis. I know that like one dealership alone, we bought 10 different Gallardos from them over the past 10 years. And it's pretty interesting. It's like, yeah, we're actually the largest Lamborghini Gallardo buyer, in their 10-year history. And it's pretty cool to have that.
That sounds very cool. Now, take me back to the beginning. How the heck does a guy get started renting the world's coolest cars?
So I am the kind of person, I've been an entrepreneur basically my whole life. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I've read and have continued to give people is that the best type of business to start is a business where you experience the exact pain point that you're trying to solve. And I think that's where you're going to get the best experience and be able to be in the best position to solve a problem. So I, back in 2002, wanted to do the Gumball 3000 with a buddy of mine. We wanted to do, it was New York to LA in the summer of '03. We wanted to do it. It seemed like it would be an amazing experience. I wanted to rent a car to do it. I wanted to rent a Lamborghini, and do the drive. And I went around and I started, researching just like, most of our customers do today. I went on the web and started researching, renting a Ferrari or renting a Lamborghini, and was pretty disappointed to discover that there really wasn't a big opportunity to do that, especially in New York. There were definitely some companies in LA, and there are definitely some companies in Miami that did this, but there was nobody of note in the New York market where you could do this. And I said, well, that's silly. It seems to me that, people would kind of be interested in that. New York's the greatest city on earth. New York's a place where you can get anything you want. If I want a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, I should be able to get it. And, I used a couple really valuable web search tools that let you kind of monitor what other people are searching for. And one of the things I discovered was about 50 people a month were searching for the exact phrase or a slight variation, Ferrari rental New York. And there were literally no results for it. And I said, well, that's interesting, and I started doing the numbers and kind of figuring out, if I maybe could do this as a side business, buy one car, rent it on the side. Maybe it would make me some beer money. Maybe it would pay for my apartment. And I'd have a Ferrari, not a terribly bad fringe benefit for a 25-year-old guy living in New York City. And so I did the math and figured it would really only need, a couple days a month to cover the costs and, maybe make a little profit for myself. And so I said, you know what, let's do this. It seemed easy at the time. It was certainly not easy to get started. Getting insurance took me almost a year. I had hundreds of phone calls with brokers and insurance, executives, most of whom said, are you nuts? We don't have any interest in covering this type of business, and you'd get these sort of really frustrating catch-22 answers like, well, if you had 10 Ferraris, we'd cover you. Or if you had one Toyota, we'd cover you. And if you had one Ferrari in the middle of Nebraska, we'd cover you. But starting with one Ferrari in the middle of New York, not a chance. So it was a very frustrating process. But it took me just under a year to get it. And I, hand-built the website and put it up and, turned on the phone system and, set up a whole, voice over IP phone system, and kind of had a one-man show ready to go. And I remember when the phone rang and I said, oh my God, someone's actually calling. This is awesome. And, very quickly discovered a couple things after running the business for a month or two. First off, I was right in that people actually wanted to rent Ferraris in New York, which was great. I was wrong in my numbers and how much it would cost to run and, how many days a month I'd need to break even. It turned out to be much more expensive maintenance-wise than I expected. And I was wrong in a good way about, the 40 people a month searching for it. It turns out there were actually a lot more than that who wanted to rent cars in the area. And they ended up asking, folks would call and ask for Ferraris and Lamborghinis and Porsches. And I said, I might have something here. So we launched in March of 2004 with a single car, a Ferrari 360 Medina. And 3 months later, we bought a Lamborghini Gallardo, and away we went.
So I got to ask the question that probably some other people are wondering right now. How the heck does a 25-year-old afford to buy a Ferrari?
It's a good question. And in fact, I'm going to extend your question a little bit because I think it goes beyond just take away the Ferrari piece of it. I think the bigger question is, how does a 25-year-old get $150,000 in seed capital to start a business? Because that really is what the challenge was. Whether I was starting a printing company in which I needed a printing press, or I was starting, building an app in which I needed programmers, the fact was, I needed capital to get started. And in my case, it happened to be that, the main asset I was purchasing was a Ferrari. But I think that question can be extended. And, there isn't actually a good answer yet. And it's getting better. There are a lot of programs and there are a lot of, especially, in the tech space, there are accelerators and startups of that, startup accelerators and programs like that where you can, get seed capital to get going. But it's, no matter what you do, it's hard to get seed capital to start a business. And I did it the kind of way that people do it, which is, go to friends and family and, get a little bit of a commitment here and a little bit of a commitment there and, show them the business plan. And I think the good part in this case was of the seed capital that I started with, most of it was the car. And I remember, the thing about it is that cars are relatively fungible and there's a fairly liquid market for them and they don't really lose a ton of value. So the pitch was, look, let me get this car. Let me start. The worst things that happen is I lose, $10,000, $20,000, in the value of the car if I pay too much and I can't sell it easily. But even that's a fairly low risk scenario. And I think the people that I worked with to get started understood that. They said, look, let's give it a shot. I didn't ask for $1 million to go buy 10 cars right off the bat. I didn't need a team of people to build a piece of software for a year that money would disappear. I just needed to buy an asset. And if the business didn't work, I'd sell the asset and call it a day. And thankfully it did.
Got it. So I want to dive into logistics here a little bit to paint a clearer picture. So how much money did you raise to get this initial car? And then how much were you charging per day in that first 3 months if somebody wanted to rent it?
Yeah, so I raised $150,000, of which 120 went into the car, and 30 were working capital to kind of, get me going for the first couple of months. And the company was basically profitable within the month. We started renting it. It took me, I think, site and started doing some Google AdWords before people started, really, you don't necessarily go and book the car the first day that you see it, but you go, you read about it, you maybe make a call, you find out, and then the price was $2,000 a day. I learned almost immediately, and that is on my first customer, that those prices are always negotiated and you always have to be a little bit flexible. So that was a very early lesson that holds true for the business. And yeah.
Got it. And, I'm really curious, just one last point on the early days. I mean, besides raising the seed capital, what was the most challenging part for you?
It was getting insurance coverage. My order of operations for the business, basically I decided I wanted to start the company in about April of 2003. And I did not secure insurance coverage until January or February of 2004. And then once that happened, I kind of pulled the trigger on the money and the website, and I built, and I put the phones together and I got all the logistics in place. So it was basically 9 months of getting insurance coverage and then 3 months to actually put all the other pieces together. And I had them lined up, obviously, but of actual execution, a vast bulk of it was getting insurance coverage.
Got it. Okay, so you have people calling you, you're 3 months in, you're profitable, and people want Lamborghinis, people want Ferraris. What happened next? How did you get the next car?
So I was able to go back to the group of folks who provided me the seed capital and say, hey, look, first off, here's, a big chunk of that money that I've just earned over the past 3 months in revenue. So I'm going to now be able to put a down payment on a new car. You're going to earn your money on your first car. Let's do exactly the same thing with a second car. Only now I actually have 3 months of data. And they were very quick to say, of course, if it worked, why not, if you can, make an investment. I think a lot of people, are able to scale up and they say, look, if you make an investment and the investment starts to return and you're not, aggressive massively trying to oversaturate. People like a good return on their investment, and I provided a good return to back it up, and I was able to put some money down on a second car, so I did the exact same thing to the second car. And that was basically the process that I repeated going forward, except after enough time, I was able to exchange the private friends and family investment, and I was able to actually get financing through the dealer. So now I had a little bit of a credit history for this kind of thing. And so when car number 3 and number 4 and number 5 came around, I could go to the dealerships and say, hey, look, finance me through your, Audi Financial, for example, was one bank that happened to do it because, Lamborghini was owned by Audi. And so you could go in and Audi Financial would provide coverage and that kind of stuff. And, you're paying slightly higher interest rates and you're putting a little bit more of a down payment, but I was generating enough cash to be able to put the down payment on. And so that's how we basically scaled up from there.
Yeah, it's so interesting because a lot of the people that come on this show are software entrepreneurs, and how they scale up is they get to a certain metric or proof point and they raise a crap ton of money and hire a bunch of developers. And this seems like a much more gradual, honest growth process. Is that, is this something that you've enjoyed or you kind of wish it was the other way? Talk a little bit about this style of business versus a lot of this traditional software venture capital stuff.
Yeah, I very much enjoy it. I think, this could lead to a longer conversation, but I'm a big believer. There really are 3 things that you have to think about when you're starting a business. You have to think about whether you're building a business, whether you're building a product, or whether you're building a feature. And those are the 3, delineations. And I think that a lot of software entrepreneurs, especially these days, are looking to build products. And products means that, when you say, what's your revenue model? Well, we're not thinking about that now. We just want users. And that's fine, by the way. I'm not making a judgment as to whether one or the other is better. I'm just saying that you have to understand what it is you're doing. And when you're building a business, you want to make sure that business is going to be there and that you're not going to extend beyond what your business is capable of doing. So that's why, we took the approach of, look, we're building a business. And that way we want to go slowly and we want to make sure that we test each step of the way and make sure that, what we have is going to continue to be a business. I think a lot of software entrepreneurs are looking to build products. And that, by the way, is great because you can build a product and, sell your product to Facebook or Google or Apple and make a crap load of money these days. And that is a project. And I think a lot of people are into that. And I think that's totally fine. And also, I think there is a hybrid, right? I think there's people who are building software businesses and they discover that there's a business, and it's much easier to scale up quickly when you've locked into a good business. I'll give Uber as an example, because it's sort of a hybrid, technology, automotive company, logistics company. Uber is a business. They are looking to make a profit in what they do. And I think Uber recognizes that, it's a business and it's really attractive to a lot of people. So they've built a business, but they are scaling up very quickly and they're pumping a lot of money into it because they want to move quickly and take as much market share as they possibly can because they've got this really rabid fan base that loves their product. So I think there are companies and there are situations where it absolutely makes sense to scale up and raise a ton of venture capital money, to do that. I didn't feel that this was sort of a no-brainer as a billion-dollar business. And in fact, frankly, I still don't think it is a billion-dollar business. I think it's a niche business. I think it's, there's a market for it, but I don't think we would gain anything by rapidly expanding and raising a ton of money and buying 30 cars on day one. I just think that kind of thing takes time, and that wasn't the approach I wanted to take. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm curious to know how you've basically been able to, as a luxury business, continue to get and attract customers. Is it still online, the main channel? Is it a lot of relationships? What's the deal there?
Yeah, the answer is yes to all of the above. we've been around long enough now that we get a ton of business through our, word of mouth. We get a ton of business through relationships with concierges and hotels and, folks who know us and just trust us. We have a relationship with American Express, for example, that, we're their go-to company. When you pick up if you have a Centurion card and you pick up and you call American Express and you speak to their concierge service and you say, I need a Ferrari, we're at the top of their list. And that's just something that you get over time. We run an honest business and we've been very good for their customers. So they call us when they need something. And of course, there's an online component too. We rank very high in the search engines, and good SEO is very important to us. So that's a critical piece as well. So there's really a ton of stuff that goes into it, but it's a combination of all the above.
And how does running a business that caters to the luxury market different from a lot of these different types of entrepreneurial ventures we see out there? Because I have to imagine that, when the economy's not doing good, if you're selling Tupperware, you might be okay. But when you're selling Ferraris and Lamborghinis, what happens there?
Well, so we actually did not see a significant dip in our business when the economy during the recession, and I think this surprises a lot of people. We managed to keep our business profitable for at least most of it. There was certainly a few months of when things first happened at the end of '08 where it was a little bit of a nightmare for everyone. But '09 was a profitable year for us, and for my business, I can't speak to the greater, because I know a lot of luxury businesses were very, very hurt. For us, though, I think the desire to drive a nice car is a fundamental and sort of fairly constant desire among people. I think, you ask most people who are have any interest in cars, would you like to drive a Ferrari? And their answer is going to be yes. I think who it is changes, and our customer base certainly dramatically changed throughout the recession. We were renting to a lot of mortgage brokers and guys like that in '06 and '07, and they obviously completely disappeared. Those were the guys. But there's always some froth in some part of the economy, regardless of how the overall economy is doing. And I think where you see that, there are folks who want to have a, kick back and relax and enjoy themselves a little bit. And so, we saw a big shift in our customer base, but overall, there were still people who wanted to do the experience. So we still were able to do it.
And I know you've done some creative stuff like the Sprint program with Groupon. Can you talk about some of these kind of offshoot opportunities that you've capitalized on?
Yeah, and it all derives from a fairly basic premise of ours, right? Which is our business. If you step back and you ignore the flash and what it is we do, our business is a rental business. Our goal is to trade money for the experience of being in an exotic car. That's, if I were to describe in the most boring of, terms, that's what our business is. And what we realized was, our baseline was we're trading money for a day in an exotic car. And we said, well, let's figure out creative ways to reduce the commitment level. Maybe we want to trade money for an hour in an exotic car. Maybe we want to trade money for 5 minutes in an exotic car. And, it's not, you can't just do it, right? You can't just say, come into our office and rent a car for 5 minutes, because the logistics are impossible. You'll have a line of people going out the door. Where are they going to go? The neighbors are going to get annoyed. So we had to think about, creative ways to fulfill it. But fundamentally, our thought process was, let's just reduce the commitment level and obviously the price, and get it down so that now we offer products where we will trade you money for as little as 5 minutes in a car, which is our Dream Car Sprint product, up to a week, which is our rental product. And I think if you want to kind of get a sense of where we're going to be going in the future, look at where our divisions are, and we're just going to get more fine grained. So right now we have the Dream Car Tour, which is a 3-hour experience. We have the Dream Car Sprint, which is a 5-10 minute experience, and we've got a rental, which is a day-long experience. So there's a ton of variation in there. We've just launched this new product called the Dream Car Dash, which is going to take place on a racetrack, an actual full-size track, and that's more of a 10 to 15-minute experience. And so that'll be priced accordingly. And then, I think there's an opportunity for an hour-long experience. I think there's an opportunity for, a 20-minute experience. I just think, and you vary where you go and what you do and what the variations are, and that's really how we kind of, market what we do.
Yeah, it makes total sense, and that there's a lot of friction. I mean, I always in New York was just like, if I could just have a dog for a week, I could get a girlfriend or, whatever it is. But I mean, that can be true. That can be translated to so many different markets. Look at companies like Rent the Runway, which is, a company started by a friend of a friend. They're doing, dresses and fashion and stuff like that. And they've learned that, look, maybe you don't want to go and buy a new dress and have it. Maybe you just want it for a night. They've opened up a retail store at the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas. And one of the things that they found, I think, is that they get a lot of folks who come in, off the flight. They go to the store, they rent a dress for the night out. They go to Marquee, which is right next door. And that's, there's a business there. I know another company, I just met the founder the other day, called Style Lend, very similar. It's peer-to-peer clothing. It's if you have this awesome dress that you bought sitting in your closet, but you don't necessarily want to sell it, you might want to wear it sometime, but maybe you have somebody who want it for a little bit of time. I think there's a ton of businesses where, there's an opportunity to kind of parse up time and make that, and make products, available that way. Now, what's interesting to think about is you have this asset between American Express, probably some celebrities, probably people that deal with a ton of different people that have a lot of money. Have you ever thought about expanding into different verticals or trying to replicate this type of business and maybe for a different type of product?
No. And I think there's a lot of companies who have tried to do it, and I think it's a huge mistake. Our business is the car business. And there are commonalities among jets or houses or other things like that, but not really. It's very, 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 very different. And I think that you have to, in a business like this, you have to focus on what your product is. And our product is the car business. And I think every company I've ever seen who tries to do jets and mansions and this, they never work because they're just completely different businesses. Now, that being said, could I see us launching a completely separate business that's, luxury houses or luxury jets because they are complementary? Sure, that I could see, but Gotham Dream Cars is a exotic car business, and I don't see it going into any other area. I think that's our expertise. Those are the folks who we have working for us who know cars. Our car mechanic can't work on a jet or a boat, and so I wouldn't want him to, frankly.
Yeah, it makes sense. You don't think about all these minute details, but there's a ton of them. And I guess that kind of leads me to my next question is, what's something that you've encountered that you never would have guessed when you started this business?
That's a great question. I think the customer base is very different from what I would have expected. I think if you ask an average person in New York, let's take New York as an example, who's going to be the customer for this? I think there would be two answers. One is, investment bankers and Wall Street guys, and two would be, people who fly on private jets. So the first thing you should do is partner with all the banks, and the second thing you should do is partner with all the jet companies. I think that's the kind of conventional wisdom. And I have found both of those to be totally wrong. We certainly do have some Wall Street folks who rent from us, but it is just not our primary business. It's much more sort of folks who are, guys who own 20 pizzerias around the city, or, sort of unknown real estate guys who, own a ton of buildings in Queens, or guys who run general contracting companies. It's sort of the affluent, but not known affluent kind of folks. And I would never have guessed that. I didn't even know that segment of folks really existed, but that's really, we have one guy, who's a plastic surgeon. And he's been probably our single biggest customer. And he's not even in the city. He actually works in central New Jersey. But he's got a huge plastic surgery business, and we're sort of like his private garage. And the second thing about the private jets, it's just one of those random things. Like, we had our first office at Teterboro Airport, not really because we wanted to be at the airport. We happened to find a really great deal on office space, for warehouse space, I should say. But we kind of assumed, well, we're at Teterboro Airport, we're just going to be raking in the folks who are landing and, want a car. I would say in the 3 or 4 years that we had that office, we delivered a car to Teterboro Airport, maybe once, maybe twice. It's just, folks who are flying private, when they land, they want a nice limo there to pick them up and take them into the city. They don't want a Ferrari waiting for them. It's an interesting experience. I would not have guessed that.
Is there any creative things you've done to reach this kind of like silent millionaire segment of customers?
I'd love to take credit and say we've nailed it, but no, honestly, it's just through our regular channels. They found us. And if you have any awesome ideas on how to reach more of these folks, I'm all ears,
I guess the wealth managers right now are shrugging their shoulders that are listening to this. So I've talked to Kenny, and just as a quick background, me and Noah got introduced by one of my former colleagues, Kenny, who I guess used to work for Noah and joyride with his cars. And it's one thing I thought would be cool is a lot of entrepreneurs come on here and they talk about their servers crashing and they had to stay up all night, and that was the craziest thing that happens. I have a feeling when you're renting out luxury cars, you have some pretty interesting stories of crazy things that have happened. Could you share one of those with the audience?
Yeah, I'll give you 3 stories. That cover. First, I should reference your point about our wonderful friend Kenny. Kenny was our intern, and Kenny has the distinction of being hired and fired 4 times by me. We hired him, and Kenny is awesome, and he will, he's a wonderful guy. He'll always be a good friend, and I'm very, very thankful to have met him and become good friends with him. When he first worked for us, he was sort of like, he was the kid who just had no idea what he was doing was even wrong. So I remember once, he asked permission to pick up a car from a customer, and it was, it was near where his house was, and he lived, and he said, look, I'll save you guys the trouble. I'll pick up the car from the customer and bring it right back to my garage. We said, sure. So we gave him permission to do it. And I remember we went back and we looked on the GPS, and he picked the car up from the customer, and then he went on a 100-mile drive with one of his buddies. And, and we're like, Kenny, what are you doing? And it was so funny because his answer when he came back, and we fired him right after that. We said, Kenny, you can't take one of our cars from our customer and go joyriding. And his answer was, well, you didn't tell me I couldn't do that. You just said, make sure it gets back to your house. You didn't say I couldn't go take my friends out with him. And I was awestruck by that. And then, he's one of those guys where like, he genuinely believes that, like, it really wasn't malicious. Like, I really think he genuinely believed that it was totally fine to take our car and go a 100-mile drive with a buddy of his up to the mountains, before bringing it home. Don't
ask for permission, ask for forgiveness.
Right? Exactly. Which probably makes him a better entrepreneur too. So a second great story, was one of my favorite customers that we ever rented to. I got a call from the office of Senator Ted Kennedy one afternoon, and I said, wow, that's exciting. And I ended up talking to the woman who worked in the office, and she said, look, his wife wants to treat him. It was for a big birthday. I think it was either his 70th or his 75th birthday, and I apologize, I don't remember which one. And his wife wanted to treat him and take him down for a drive down to their vacation home in Virginia. And so I talked through, and it was really a fun experience. We talked through, we worked out the logistics. We agreed we were going to bring down our black Aston Martin Vanquish, which at the time was my favorite car, and the one that I had only one car posted on my wall, and as like my inspiration, and that was it. It was a black Aston Martin Vanquish, so it was kind of awesome to finally have that car. And we worked it out, and I went down the delivery because I wanted a chance to meet the senator because he's awesome. Actually, he was awesome. He will always be awesome. And brought the car down to DC, waited up, parked it in front of his residence. His wife came out, Victoria, and she's wonderful, and said, "Oh, he's going to be so excited." So she called him, and he comes downstairs, and he looks outside, and she goes, "Happy birthday!" And he sort of, stepped back, and he's like, "You didn't buy this for me, did you?" And
Nice.
she started laughing and said, "No, no senators, just for the weekend." So that was a really, really fun experience. And we got to, I got to show him how to drive it and, get him all on the test drive. And I got a couple great pictures, which I was really happy about. The third story, which was sort of on the crazy side of things, was probably the one time where I really wish we had a reality show. And we had a couple guys come and rent the car. They flew down from Baltimore, and they rented our Bentley convertible in Miami. And they rented the car, and they started, and we always check the car. We always look up on GPS just every day to see where our fleet is. We noticed that the Bentley had immediately started driving north. So these guys had flown down from Baltimore, picked up a car in Miami, and were immediately driving back towards Baltimore. And we said, well, that seems weird. Not, crazier, weirder things have happened, but that just seemed to be weird. And a day later, we got a call, sort of a hushed call in the morning, from a guy who was basically saying, "Look, I can't tell you who I am, but the guys who rented your Bentley are trying to steal it, and they're driving to the port, and they're going to put it in a shipping container, and you should probably, get that taken care of." And we said, "Well, thank you. Who are you?" And he said, "I can't say, but I'm gonna." And it was like we had our own little, deep throat, calling in and giving us tips about, what was going on.
It's Grand Theft Auto, man.
Yeah, right.
Video game.
And he kept calling back. He'd call, "Hey, have you guys picked up the car yet? What are you doing?" And so, interesting fact, by the way, if you call the police and you tell the police, "Hey, we have some people who are trying to steal our car," the first thing they say to you is, "Well, have they stolen it yet?" And we say, "Well, no, but we've been told they're bringing it to a shipping container and they're going to steal it." And they say, "Well, call us back when they've stolen it." Because right now they haven't committed a crime. And you say, "Well, once they've stolen it, the car will be on a shipping container in the middle of the ocean." And they said, "Sorry, that's the way things work." And it was sort of a remarkable experience, and surreal for us. And so we ended up finding, thankfully, we got a guy in the Grand Theft Auto specialty division with the Maryland State Police who had been looking for this group. They had been known for stealing luxury cars and shipping them off. And so we finally got his attention, and he was like, "Aha, this is actually my chance to crack this case," because this is what he wants. You don't want to hear once the car's gone. You want to hear when the car is in the process of being gone. So we got this trooper and detective, I guess, to get super excited. And they set up a sting, and they sent out a SWAT team to where the car was located with helicopters, and they raided this whole facility. They ended up recovering I think they recovered 10 cars, and they busted all the guys in the group. But I just remember the moment where I was sitting on my phone getting updates from, this detective saying, "Okay, SWAT team going in." You could hear the radios crackling in the background, and, "All right, they're prying the door open. Oh, okay, please confirm you've got the blue Bentley." And we said, "Yes, that's ours." They said, "Okay, we got it. It was a really intense and an amazing experience. So that's one that will always stick out.
Yeah, that sounds certainly a little more interesting than servers crashing. That's for sure.
Yeah, it has its moments, right?
Is there any other? I mean, I think this business, and to give you a little background, I've been in kind of quote unquote sexy businesses. My first job was actually at a sports agency that represented pro baseball players. And I think a lot of people, they hear these stories, they hear these things like, "Wow, this is so much cooler than my Excel jockey job at the bank," or wherever it is. Is there any downsides to this type of business?
I mean, The only downside I can come up with, and I expect you to cry me a river on this one, is I'm not the kind of person that that wants to do the same thing over and over and over. I know there are a lot of people. I know a kid who's this insane photographer, who is an automotive photographer, and he's been doing it for 10 years, and he still gets excited every time he sees a Ferrari. The same level of excitement as the first time he ever saw one. I'm not that kind of person. I get there's a saturation point. So I think the biggest downside for me is that my initial sort of excitement about all these cars has given way for sort of a nonchalance about, look, the cars are metal and they make us money and they run our business. And so I've lost a little bit of something of that kind of excitement for the cars themselves. I still love cars and I still get excited when we get a new car, but I don't get excited about getting a new car because I really want to go drive it for a week. I get excited because it'll do well for our business and our customers will be happy. So I've definitely cured myself of the car thing, which some might say is a bad thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I've talked to a lot of different people, and it's go build a product that you're passionate about. And I'm kind of more the type of entrepreneur that, like, man, I want to build a group of people that I really like, or a company that I really like, because that's what's really most important, not like the physical thing we're selling. And it sounds like maybe you're from the same school of thought.
Yeah, I agree. I would love, this is a whole separate topic, but, I believe that hiring people is one of the most important things in any business and biggest challenges. And, it's such a shame that when you hire a wonderful group of people for a business, if the business gets sold or if it fails or whatever happens to it, that the people dissipate. And it seems to me that, I like the idea sort of fundamentally, even though I don't have experience with this, of like finding your dream team of people and working on multiple things with them, and if one business doesn't work, you do a different one. And if you build one, maybe you build a different one, because the biggest effort is finding great people. And if you can find great people, then you can crank out a bunch of great ideas and great businesses and make great products.
I love it, man. It does really sound like a dream. Because at the end of the day, that's that working side by side next to somebody that you really love and care about and is going to do an excellent job. It's the most rewarding part. So I wanted to finish up with just a question here that I always ask our guests who've done really inspiring and awesome things. For everyone who's listening out there, we always try to get them a tip or a practice or habit or just a piece of advice that helps them get a competitive edge in their own entrepreneurial journey. Is there a piece of advice that you could give people about something that you've done that's really helped you in your journey?
I think there's a bunch of ideas that I would have about advice that I could probably go on for ages on that. But I think the single biggest and important tip that I can give people is, to use a colloquial term, understand the difference between negative feedback on an idea and haters. And what I mean by that is I think there are people, when they hear that you're starting a business or starting a new product, there are people who are just going to be jealous, and there are people who are just going to not want you to do well. And those are the haters, those people are out there, and it's a natural part of jealousy, and it's a part of the human emotion. But there's also people out there who genuinely want to give you feedback, and they want to give you negative feedback or positive feedback. And I think it is incredibly important to develop a sense of distinction between the two types of feedback. And you have to ignore the people who are just going to be negative, and you have to listen to the people who are giving you actual negative feedback, because I think that's really important. And it's hard. If it were easy, everyone would know how to do it right away. But it's hard because I think there are a lot of people who it confuse every bit of negative feedback for haters. So they just say, oh, I gotta, this idea is gonna work, even though everyone tells me it's not gonna work. And likewise, there are people who get discouraged by people who are just hating on them really quickly. And I think, so developing a sense for how to listen to feedback and how to judge the person giving you feedback as to whether they're really the right kind of person to give you feedback. Sometimes, and this is just going to be a generic knock on lawyers. I love lawyers, obviously, and hate them at the same time. But like a lot of people ask their lawyers for business advice. And, in general, it's not a great idea because lawyers their job is to, protect you and to know the law and to know all the possible things that can go wrong. And so a lot of folks will ask their buddy who's a lawyer for business advice, and they'll get this 100-page long, reason why it won't work because of these regulations. And then they'll go and they'll listen to that and they'll say, oh, well, I should give up. Or on the other end, they'll go to somebody who's an expert in their field who will tell them, hey, this piece of advice, I think this business is not going to work for these reasons. And they dismiss it by saying, oh, they're just being a hater. And I think you can't make either of those mistakes. You have to understand how to listen to feedback and what the right feedback is.
Are there any key indicators that you look for when you're trying to evaluate whether somebody's trying to be helpful or they're just hating?
I mean, you just have to know who they are, and you have to be a good judge of character and of people. And you have to listen, have to understand what their, basis for giving you the feedback is, and whether they're really, you have to judge somebody's ability to give you feedback. If I go and I ask, Tim Cook for, his opinion on my piece of, computer software, I'm going to listen to his feedback. The guy runs Apple. He knows what works and what doesn't. But, and that's a very extreme example, but, if you ask my advice on a real estate business, don't listen to my opinion because I don't know anything about the real estate business, I know a lot about business. So, color that and understand. And then maybe that's it. You have to kind of rank, you could say, all right, well, Noah knows a lot about business. And so he knows what generally works and what doesn't, but he also knows nothing about the real estate business. So, if this is a real estate specific question, maybe I shouldn't really listen to his feedback. But if it's kind of a general business question, maybe I should. And you have to build that model for the people that you talk to and kind of get a sense for, is this person qualified to give me feedback?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice because everybody has an opinion out there, and sometimes we can really get, I don't know, it's just like our head feels like it's going to blow up because we have 20 different people telling us 20 different things, and trying to figure out who we should listen to can be super challenging.
Yeah, and along those lines, another point I just thought of, sometimes you'll get confused. People will say, well, this guy sold his company for $1 billion, so therefore he can answer any business question. And that doesn't necessarily, make this person an expert. Yes, it perhaps may make him an expert in, the process of selling your company for $1 billion. I would certainly, listen to, his advice on that. But, sometimes people get clouded and they think, well, he was successful, therefore he has all the answers. So, just have some discretion in who you seek advice from, and know who is going to give you a good opinion or not.
It's great advice, which is kind of an ironic thing to say after we're just talking about advice. But Noah, I just want to thank you for coming on today and telling us how you built your business, some of the things that have worked, some of the things that have been challenging. I think a lot of us are really going to take a lot away from this conversation. If people want to get more information on you, on Gotham Dream Cars, where's the best place for them to go?
So Gotham Dream Cars is the website, is gothamdreamcars.com. Me personally, I'm very easily reached. I'm always happy to chat. My Twitter handle is @NoahLH. My email address is, Noah. I try to get to all the emails. I'm very open about that. So that's probably the easiest place to get me. That's pretty much it.
Awesome. And you conveniently cut out when you gave away your email address. So I just want to double check that. It's Noah @Gotham Dream Cars.
Yep, that's it.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll talk to you again. Thanks for the time.
Before we finish up with today's Mindshare, I just want to say thanks for listening to another episode of The Competitive Edge. If you enjoyed the ideas in this episode and want access to all the conversations, tactics, and mind shares we'll be sharing in the future, the best thing you can do is subscribe to The Competitive Edge on iTunes. And while you're there, if you felt like this show has made a positive impact on your day, it'd be great if you could leave us a review on iTunes as well. Now, I know we covered a lot in this episode, and there might be a few key ideas or tools that you want to remember. So we went ahead and compiled all of the notes, links, and even a full searchable transcript of this conversation for you on lifelonglearner.com. That's life-longlearner.com. I also want to give you the details on a cool contest I'm running right now at lifelonglearner.com/fun. By entering the contest, you'll have a chance to win everything from Amazon gift cards to a free month of having your very own dedicated virtual assistant to an opportunity to come and hang out with me and my buds for a few days where we'll teach you how to create your very own passive income stream. To enter this contest and learn more about everything we're giving away, head on over to lifelonglearner.com/fun. Hey, what's up, guys? I hope you enjoyed this episode with Noah from Gotham Dream Cars. And for today's Mindshare, I thought we could just actually expand upon this concept of who we should take advice from. I know in my life, between my mentors, between my friends, between my parents' friends, I have a million different people telling me what I should do with my life and career. And honestly, at times it can be a little stressful because a lot of these opinions are very disparate. For example, when I told people that I was moving to Brazil and leaving the New York tech scene, people thought I was crazy. And my dad's friends said I was nuts. I was ruining my career. I was going to have a hole in my resume. Then I have my mentors at my company telling me that it's great. They're supporting me. My friends telling me that I shouldn't leave because they want me to stay in the city. Whatever it is, all of these different forces. And I think that it can be really overwhelming if we don't have a good framework to judge whose advice we should be taking. So I want to give you two frameworks that I use when considering advice. The first one is do I want this person's life? So when somebody tells me, how I should live my life, it's usually what they're usually saying is how they lived their life, because they think that they have a good life, or they think that they're right, or that they made the optimal decision. And so, you have to be really, really careful when you take this kind of advice from somebody and, just look like, okay, this person's telling me to do this. Is this something that I really want for my life? Like, do I want to have what they have? Because that's the reference point that they're coming from. So that's one that I really like, especially when it comes down to career stuff, lifestyle stuff. I mean, everybody, whether they want to admit it or not, everybody has an internal self-bias. Second thing that I like to use when evaluating advice is, does this person have an appropriate vantage point to understand this decision? So it's really interesting to me when entrepreneurs who are trying to start a business, ask somebody who has a $50 million business what they should do to get their first customer. Now, it's not to say that person won't be helpful, but where their mindset is, where their headspace is, where they've been and operating from for the last couple of years is probably very different from where they were when they were trying to get their first customer. So I think that when you're asking for advice, you want to make sure that you're asking people who understand your vantage point with some bit of recency or at least relevant experience, because otherwise they could be giving you advice for a situation that they've never actually encountered themselves. So this is how I like to think about advice. I actually ignore a lot of advice, especially from people that I don't look up to, don't think understand my situation, or don't have the life that I want. And I think that's a really good habit to build, because if you take everybody's advice, you're probably going to end up doing nothing or doing a bunch of things that actually aren't in alignment with what you want for your life. So that's kind of how I think about advice, whose advice I should take. And I hope that when you get advice, maybe one of these things can help you out in your journey. Thanks again for tuning in today. I hope you have an excellent day.